So I've stepped in relatively short notice. So I do apologise if the slides I've put together for this appear slightly cobbled together, because they have been, but hopefully they will be informative to you. I'm going to start with what I think we were intending to present, but it's my take. The government's recent draft statement of strategic priorities for the telecommunications and radio sectors. I'll do that very quickly. It's not my work, it's the government's work, but it's a statement of priorities that Ofcom is required to have regard to spectrum management. So it's an important framework document for us, and it helps guide what we do. I just go through. I mean, I think there are 5 strategic priorities overall in the statement. I'm just going to cover the first 2 because they're the ones that are most relevant to spectrum itself. Strategic priorities that deal with things like security and resilience and postal services and things that the spectrum manager is particularly interested in, though I'm sure other people are. So the first one of these is driving growth through world-class digital infrastructure, and that sort of driving growth theme comes all the way through the statement of strategic priorities, and it's one of the government's key objectives. Is growth and how to drive growth and innovation to grow the UK economy. So there's a national ambition, widespread availability of high quality standalone 5G in all populated areas by 2030, and near universal 99% access to gigabit capable fixed communications by 2032. So those are the sort of headlines for this first strategic priority, and obviously there's implications for us in terms of what Ofcom needs to do, including monitoring investment in telecommunications. ALF is our charging framework for scarce spectrum, so we have regard to how we use our ALF framework to support market outcomes, and we need to be reporting on 4 and 5G coverage and performance. Strategic priority 2, I go into a little bit more detail on this one. So this first slide, and there are 2 subsequent slides just covering the key elements. So there's spectrum sharing, maintaining and building innovative approaches. For instance, like the shared access framework in 38242 that we introduced a few years ago, automation of licensing processes to progress our work on automation of those of licenses, particularly shared access licenses, exploring short-term licenses for occasional use in shared spectrum, for instance, for the PMSE sector. If you're going in a certain area and you need, for a sporting event, you need a bit of spectrum for 2 or 3 days, how do we facilitate that? And we've got evolution of the spectrum access and sharing mechanisms. So learning from the government's spectrum sandboxes and other initiatives that are ongoing, and how that should inform our policy going forward. So that's something else that we should pay particular attention to. Public sector spectrum access, ensuring the needs of critical users, for instance, defence, are met whilst maximising opportunities to boost spectrum value and growth through release and sharing. Emergency services, transport and utilities, ensuring requirements are factored into spectrum allocation decisions. Creative industries, PMSE for instance, So there's a requirement to review spectrum requirements and technological trends to ensure continued access for this crucial sector, and future digital terrestrial television, for us to proactively engage with government, ensuring appropriate consideration to the potential value of spectrum and the needs of continued serving of audiences. As you may or may not know, the DTT multiplex spectrum license expire in 2034. So there's currently a debate on what happens with the 470 to 694 spectrum. At that point, what do we do? And there's various options that are being considered about continuation of services, scaling back of services, complete shutdown. All of that is being considered at the moment. Space ambitions, shaping the international framework to support space services to ensure UK space industry thrives. In the same theme on international spectrum negotiations in CPT and ITU, just to maximise our influence in those negotiations, to work collaboratively with allies and global partners with common interests to ensure the international framework works for UK, Europe and globally, and Ofcom to work closely with government to ensure strategic priorities, e.g. national security and resilience, are also considered. And then a fit for purpose regulatory regime, so for Ofcom to update government on the suitability of the current framework for spectrum management and any scopes for legislative updates to support any advancements in that. So that's the statement of strategic priorities from the government. I'll just go through a few key things Ofcom are doing. As you will see from the slides I present now, a lot of what the government have put in that draft statement of strategic priorities are things that Ofcom is already working on and has plans to continue working on over the next few years. So just looking at this is just a pictorial view of a sectoral view, put it that way, of various initiatives that we're working on at the moment. I won't go through everything on this slide. You'll get the slides afterwards, but we've got key work in here, like our work on 6 gigahertz, both upper and lower 6 gigahertz. We've got work for supporting NGSO. We've got on the satellite side, we've got our further work on providing spectrum access for satellite gateways in QV and E bands and consideration of W and D bands. We've got shared access framework in bands like 3.8 to 4.2. We've got our consideration of spectrum in 1.9 gigahertz for railways and emergency services. Further access to spectrum for supplementary downlink in 1.4 gigahertz spectrum. We've just had the millimeter wave auction where we sold, I can't remember how much, 5 or 6 gigahertz of spectrum in 26 and 42 gigahertz. We've talked about DTT and our further work looking at options going forward in 600 megahertz. So there's a whole gamut of work we are currently involved in and considering about future spectrum pipeline and what that might look like. And this is just a sort of a timeline view of something similar, which just shows the where we are in some of that work. So, for instance, we've done work already on improvements to the shared access framework, so the SAL framework. We have done further work around 3.9 gigahertz spectrum and the license variation for UK broadband to improve access across that band and shift them down in the spectrum to make use of the overall 3.8 to 4.2 more efficient. We're working on direct to device. We're working on gateway spectrum for Q-band and E-band. We're working on up to 6 gigahertz. All of that's been work in progress this year. Next year, we expect to make further progress. For instance, as I mentioned, spectrum for emergency services and railways in 1.9 gigahertz spectrum. We've got AFC that we're introducing in 6 gigahertz. We'll have concluded the work hopefully on 1.4 gigahertz spectrum, and then 2027 plus. There's even more work will be coming on stream then. So we're looking at the 2 gigahertz MSS bands and their future utilization. W and D bands, more satellite, other access in those bands. We've got WRC itself. We've got out of that, we've got E-band, and out of that, there will be probably a future agenda item looking at 600 megahertz UHF spectrum, which will dovetail with our work on terrestrial digital television. So there's an awful lot going on. There will be an awful lot going on for the foreseeable future.
Hey, Martin.
Yes.
If you could go back to the previous slide. Quick question. You call it 600 megahertz. So have you made up your mind that's going to be the top part?
No.
614 or 470?
No.
The whole thing you're going to study?
Yes, so we're studying the needs of the digital terrestrial television industry and PMSE, covering the whole of that 470 to 694 megahertz band. There's no decision about whether there's a release or not yet, and if there's a release, whether we keep a portion at the lower portion and release 600. All of that's still to be decided. There's a slide at the very end that covers that. Speed up because I won't get there otherwise. Just to say, sharing is is key to our spectrum strategy. And sharing has always been important for spectrum, and spectrum has always been shared. But we are now in a world where sharing has to be, considered very, very carefully, because we need to share much more intensively than we ever have before. And so how do you share both frequency in time, in power? I mean, there are various dimensions that you can look at when you want to do sharing, and it filters through in all of the work we're doing. So we've got a shared access framework in various bands, including 3.842, 2.3, 1 gigahertz. We've got the millimeter wave work that I just talked about, where 26 gigahertz, for instance, we're making shared access licenses available across that spectrum, as well as awarding spectrum for mobile operators in high density areas. 1.4 SDL, we're looking at the coexistence issues with satellite use in the adjacent bands. We're looking at direct-to-device sharing mobile bands with satellite, so that you can get a signal from a satellite direct to a handset. 6 gigahertz, we've got our AFC framework we want to introduce, and we've got our ideas of flexible sharing between mobile and Wi-Fi in the upper band. So it's key to all of what we do is sharing. I'll just whiz through a few of the key bits of work that we have been doing and are doing. So first of all, our shared access framework. As you probably know, we introduced this in 2019, so it's been with us for quite a while. In 2024, we launched a review of that, and we have implemented some amendments to the way we issue and we assess shared access license applications for shared access, to try and improve the service that is delivered to customers and to pack more users in more densely. As you can see from the graph, we've got shared access licenses pretty much scattered right across the whole country, both for the indoor the outdoor medium power licenses. In total, at the moment, we've got about just over 900 shared access licenses across the 4 bands that you see there, with the majority in 3.8 to 4.2, and also quite a lot in the 2 by 3 and a bit gigahertz of spectrum that we've got in 1800 megahertz. As I said, we reviewed how that shared access framework was working in 2024, so last year, and we've made some improvements to that regime to enable users to be more densely packed, to be more responsive, so that we can turn around licenses more quickly and just make the whole process more automated for everyone. So that's what we have been doing, and we will continue to look at how we improve that framework. So it's not the end of the process. I think we will continue to react to stakeholder feedback in terms of how that shared access framework works, how much spectrum is needed for it, in which bands, how well we respond to their requests. So all of that is work that we will continue to look at, and as needed, we'll improve that, continually improve that. Work on 6 gigahertz. Sorry, yes.
Yes, sorry, I have a question concerning the private network. Is the use and application more industrial application or quite diverse type of use?
It's quite a diverse use. Some of it's industrial, some of it's, for instance, fixed wireless access, agricultural use. So there's a quite a diverse. I didn't put a slide up which sort of goes through all the different industry sectors that use that spectrum, but it is used by a range of industries for different types of applications. So it's not just industrial automation type thing.
Martin, on your slide before, there's on the right side, you are talking about synchronization.
Yes.
Is the idea to synchronize other networks? Because
No, it's not to synchronize, but it's the basis of which we calculate coexistence. So we assume networks are synchronized when we do the coordination calculations, which allows us to pack more densely, on the basis that if users are packed more densely, there will be an incentive for them to cooperate and synchronize.
Oh, okay.
So we make that assumption, but it's not a requirement in the framework.
Okay, thanks.
6 gigahertz, AFC in lower 6 gigahertz. So we consulted on introducing an AFC framework. We continue to work on that. We expect to publish decisions and consultation on exactly how the framework would work, hopefully before the end of the year. For the upper 6 gigahertz, we consulted on sharing between Wi-Fi and mobile, dynamic sharing between Wi-Fi. We proposed various schemes that would allow that to happen. So the infamous or famous or whatever you want to call it, indoor-outdoor split, and then there's the prioritized band split approaches. So there were a couple of different approaches we consulted on how we might take that forward. We're continuing to work with our CPT colleagues on international framework of how that might happen. At the moment, it looks like a prioritized band split, might be the outcome that comes out of that work, and we would aim to maintain alignment with our European colleagues. But it's a balance between progressing the work in the UK and showing leadership and waiting for and trying not to get out of step with the European harmonization work. So it's, you know, we want to nudge Europe in the right direction, but we don't want to risk going too far off track in terms of a divergence between UK and Europe, because if we do that, we won't maintain the economies of scale you need. So we're looking at what's happening in Europe very closely. We're very interested in where the Radio Spectrum Policy Group will get to next month, because they are due to publish their opinion on up to 6 gigahertz. Then we are anticipating that they will come out with a prioritized band split approach, but we don't know exactly that's what they will do. So we'll see. But we are preparing for whatever outcome comes out of that, and how we might react depending on what they do. But we do aim to make further decisions and publish further consultation on how we might do things in the UK before the end of the year as well. And we've got this two-phase approach where we would like to move early with Wi-Fi where we can, because Wi-Fi kit is already available. It's available in other markets, mostly in North America. So we can piggyback off early access to kit for Wi-Fi. But work on mobile take a bit longer, particularly if there's clearance needed. We need the European harmonization work to conclude, which will happen hopefully around 2027. And we need to think about any potential clearances that we might need, for instance, fixed links in the band, if they intersect with the areas where we expect the greatest demand for mobile will be, which will be in those high density areas. So some of you may well know that for the millimeter wave auction, we auctioned only in the largest towns and cities in the United Kingdom. We didn't authorize, the auction didn't authorize access outside of those areas. We anticipate something similar for 6 gigahertz. We don't anticipate that we would award mobile licenses across the whole of the country. A similar model to what we've done for millimeter wave. Outside those areas, then we don't anticipate significant, there might be a bit, but we don't expect significant mobile rollout. And so outside those areas, it's quite possible that mobile and Wi-Fi could coexist. And we need to find out ways to make sure that happens. So we're waiting for that European work to continue and reach solutions. We're also thinking about, having introduced AFC in the lower portion, whether AFC in the upper portion is also something we want to consider to help manage coexistence of Wi-Fi with incumbent services. So that's something else we are thinking about at the moment.
Can I ask a question on your 6 gigs?
Yeah.
The problem is your plans are brilliant, but the suppliers out there are not telling. We had in America this year, we had a stadium where they put in a Wi-Fi system all the way to 7.125 gigs, right? They're not the primary user above 6.425. And we're seeing lots more of this, and people don't understand the rules between indoor and what's outdoor. And a lot of the Wi-Fi people just don't care about wireless cameras, ultra wideband systems. There's a lot of other systems that it's using these bands.
Yeah.
So education of a lot of the suppliers is going to be number one, because I don't want to be going around fighting with all these venues and stadiums saying that you've spent £4 million in a 6 gigs expansion, but you're going to have to shut half of it off because guess what? You're breaking the rules. But if you say open up the whole entire band, are you talking all the way up to 7 gig, the top end of 6 gigs? Because then we're going to lose PMSE camera frequencies will be pushed again.
Well, we are thinking of a framework. So there will be a framework for AFC that covers initially up to 6425.
Uh-huh.
The further work is whether we extend that up to 7125, and if we do, how we do that. So yeah, we definitely want to introduce AFC for standard power and outdoor Wi-Fi in lower 6 gigahertz. There's also the question about what do we do about upper 6 gigahertz, and can AFC play a role in managing Wi-Fi coexistence with incumbents in that band. But you raise good points. Is there are other uses of the spectrum. There are other incumbent uses of the spectrum which we need to consider. We are considering eventually allowing mobile in at least a proportion of upper 6 gigahertz at some point in the next 5 years or so. So that will have to be considered as part of the overall consideration of the future of the band. And PMSE uses, and it's got a sliver of spectrum that is used at the very top of the 6 gigahertz band. And there's an ability to borrow others. Now, that ability to borrow other spectrum will stay, but it might be more constrained if there are more users in the band. But we are considering what to do about the 15 megahertz of spectrum that sits at the very top of the band, and what the future of that is for PMSE. So that's all.
15 megs isn't good for a wireless camera. The most we can go down is 14 megs, because you won't get the high definition. So again, you know, and also the suppliers is a key thing. Your Huawei's, all your Arubas, all these people need to be told.
Yeah,
and enforcement needs to be carried out. But well, you don't have enforcement. You've got spectrum assurance.
But we do have, but let's not get sidetracked into that. But I hear your comments and your concerns, and yeah, I mean those are things we are actively thinking about. So comments well made. But there was another question here.
Okay, going on something more simple, the lower 6 gig, and where you said that you have a very aggressive timeline to introduce the AFC in the band. If you remember, at the time of TV white space, Ofcom chose to do something very different from US and Canada. The result has been a nightmare, and anyway, TV white space was not a big success. How close you think the framework on the AFC, even if it's on the lower part of the 6 gigahertz band, how close it will be from the US framework? Saying that if history can teach something, right? UK being an island, but
is to keep it as close to the framework as
yeah. So there is really this mindset.
Clear intention to keep it as close to the framework that exists in North America as we can. There might need to be 1 or 2 tweaks, but nothing fundamental. Kit that works in North America should be able to work in the UK. And that's
there is 2 things in adopting a framework is the rules, which can be very similar. And also for TV white space, the way you certified was very different, and it was also not bringing a lot of ease. Are you also looking at the way the FCC, for example, have been certifying those AFCs?
Yeah.
Okay, so
we would be looking at both how ISED and FCC do their certification. And we are looking to adopt as close a regime as we can, and to build on those certifications where we can. So if AFC systems have already been certified in North America, we don't want to duplicate all of that certification process in the UK, but we need to make sure that those systems do comply with the specific bits of the framework that are relevant to the UK. So we're looking at all of that, but the intention is definitely to build on and not diverge from what's already happening, particularly in North America.
Okay, thank you.
I am running out of time, so I don't know how.
Okay, I think another 5.
Okay.
That's okay.
I'll
Thanks.
skip this slide because I think we've already talked about it. I think at the moment we are more likely to be here than here, though. And if I were to guess correctly, the split is probably around about 160 megahertz for Wi-Fi priority and the rest for priority. But it's not been decided. It's moving.
Happened last year.
Yeah. Just a little bit about D2D. I won't dwell on these sides, but we're working on direct-to-device. We've consulted on framework for authorizing device-to-device in mobile bands. So that's in bands below 3 gigahertz, FDD and SDL bands. We're just expecting an evolution in services, so it will start relatively basic, but we do expect over time the types of services you get from satellites to mobile phones will evolve. And just to say, we made a decision in September to authorize direct-to-device in the UK. The existing mobile operator, well, not the existing mobile operator, it will be under the mobile operator licenses, but suitably varied with conditions to protect adjacent bands, cross-border, and co-channel bands outside the coverage areas. So I won't dwell on that, but we are in the process of finalising further decisions to enable that regime to actually start early in the new year. So operators to apply for the variations. We also need to vary our license exemption regime to enable handsets to work with satellites. All that work is now reaching a conclusion, and so we have to have this regime in place, as I said. Yes. Operators can start offering services. Just a little about 600 megahertz. We talked about it earlier. So I've included the whole range here. So it's 470 to 694. This is very early because the work on this is going to take a number of years. And at the moment, we're looking at the sort of options that might be on the table. So the sort of things we're talking about are investing in the existing networks to implement the latest technology, which is more spectrally efficient, which would allow the same sort of services in a smaller amount of spectrum, which would give scope for some sort of release. The downsides of that are you might need to upgrade. You will need to upgrade lots of transmitters, but you also need to upgrade a good chunk of user equipment, people's TV sets as well, if you make that decision. So there's pros and cons of that. You get more for less in terms of better spectral efficiency, but it costs more. We could slim down the service, so a sort of nightlight service where you keep a small number of muxes on stream rather than the 6 we've currently got. Provide fewer services, but keep that going for those users who would find it difficult to switch, for instance, to IPTV or other services. Or there's the full switch off option, which is potentially on the table. Whilst we're doing this, we're also looking at the needs of the PMSE community, because at the moment this spectrum is shared by DTT and PMSE. If we squeeze DTT, release another chunk of spectrum, that's squeezed where PMSE can operate. So we need to think about what do we do for the needs of the spectrum needs for the PMSE community. Ties back to one of the issues in the statement of strategic priorities. So that's another piece of work we will do, and we will do that quite quickly. We anticipate having a good look at that next year in terms of what are the options, and do that review as quickly as we can, because we want to, you know, as things evolve, we want to make sure that we have taken into account the needs of that community. We've got the WRC in 2032, where the future of DTT spectrum is going to be on the agenda. To go into that, knowing what a good outcome looks like for us. So there's quite a lot of work to do. And of course, if you are planning to make changes to the DTT network, they take a long time. You've got to plan what you do for all of the transmitters in the UK, but you've also got to work internationally. And how do you coordinate with everyone in Western Europe as well? So that's another massive piece of work. Yeah, it's on our list of things to do, and I'll call it.
Thank you very much.
You found that interesting.